Hello, weird readers. Today I'm going to review two books for you. I'm going to be reviewing My Name is Human by Rob Shepherd and Lisey Story by Stephen King. I'm going to start with My Name is Human. It's shorter, it's a novella. It's I think about 100 pages. And so let me read you the synopsis here. When your loneliness means your work becomes your obsession, what happens when that obsession becomes real? What happens when the virtual becomes flesh? Sci-fi meets horror in this terrifying exploration in human dependency, and dystopian ideas turn upside down. One man finds out what happens when the lines between humanity and electronic blur. Is emotion a solely human trait, or can it be attained? Can a computer have a soul? This terrifying novella from the 2016 SIBA Award-nominated author Rob Shepherd doesn't hold back the horrifying possibilities to these questions. Now, this as actually, I think I called it a novella. It's actually more of a novelette. I can't see it being much longer than like 13 pages. I can't seeing it being much longer than 18,000 words is what I'm trying to say. So it's a very fast read, and it comes in a single on ebook. I don't know if you can get the physical copy. I'm pretty sure you can, but you should double check that before if you want the physical copy. But I read it, actually I listened to it on my Audible account. It's an audiobook, it's very well done. But you can also get the ebook on Kindle. Now, as for the story, I think it's one that a lot of us bookish people can relate to. Not all of us, of course, but some of us can relate to. And it's, it's Peter. He buys a computer that is designed to become a user's companion. And I believe he bought this computer to help him with work at first, but the computer's meant, the artificial intelligence is actually more meant for developing a relationship. And that's why I said that I think that us bookish people, some of us anyway, can relate to this, because honestly, if anything happened to Jen, my wife, where I was left alone, I think I'm done, honestly, with relationships. Not to say that my relationship with Jen is bad, it's just, it'd be easier, I think, with a computer, an artificial intelligence. I don't know what that says about me, but there it is. But yeah, so the computer is sentient, and the problem here is that it really, really wants to be an actual human being. So Peter orders parts from it. You can update this thing so that it looks more human. You could get like legs, a head, a torso. At first, just like a box, but you can get like the human parts for it. I think it's either that or Peter comes up with something else. Anyways, he does design a human, but even that's not enough. When she's transferred into that human-looking thing, she still wants to become human, and so that's where I'm going to leave the synopsis, because I don't want to spoil too much, but this does really go into some Clive Barker territory. He doesn't copy from Clive Barker by any means, but there's definitely some Clive Barker there. And anyone who's read this story knows exactly what I'm saying. I don't want to say which Clive Barker, because that might spoil the horror of this. I pretty much spoiled the science fiction, but the horror is a lot of fun too. And so the writing of this book, I keep mentioning this, and I hope Rob doesn't mind if he's watching, but it's very well done. Like I said, I listened to the audiobook, and I loved the the sentence structure and the choice of words, because Rob writes, he's not too far away from people who wrote in the 40s and 50s. And I don't mean that as an insult. I think it's Rob showing his influences on his sleeve, and I think that's fantastic. He's a very good writer, but he is a little bit antiquated, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's fantastic that he writes in that sort of style. As I said here in my notes, it feels like a story published 100 years ago in a copy of Weird Tales magazine. And I honestly, I can't think of a higher honor than that. That is that's pretty cool. So that's one thing I go to Rob Shepherd for, is his older style of writing. It's not, now don't get me wrong here, it's not like some of the older fiction. He does incorporate modern language into his writing, but when you're reading it, you just can't help but if you've read classic fiction at all, you can't help but think this could have been written 100 years ago, and yet it feels like it's a part of today's world too. So there's something very interesting going on with Rob's style, and that's something that fascinates me with his writing, and I'm going to continue reading him. That's going to be one reason why I continue reading him. His characters felt very real to me in this. There's only like two characters. You got the computer and the computer's name, because Peter, the other character, the main character, he didn't know what to name it. And so when he first turned on the artificial intelligence, she was like, I think she identified herself as a female, and or he programmed her in as a female, and the first thing she asked was, "What is my name?" And he's like, "I don't know. Why don't you name yourself?" And so she said, "My name is Human." And so right from the beginning, she's obsessed with becoming human. And Peter, he kind of falls for her, and ends up doing her bidding. But the characters are very real, and if I remember correctly, Peter got the computer to help out with work. He didn't get it necessarily for the relationship aspects, but of course that develops. I could feel Peter's loneliness, though. He feels like a very lonely kind of character. He's never really had a serious relationship, and he's only really known his job, and that's all he does is work. Overall, I find that this is a very well done story. I think you should pick this up to read it for a couple of reasons. One, it's very good science fiction horror with an artificial intelligence in it, and two, it's very short. You can read it in one sitting very easily. I gave this one 5 stars because I found nothing wrong with it. In fact, I think it has a pretty good statement on the human condition, whether it's artificial or not, and how greed comes into play of existence, and also loneliness, and what loneliness can make us do if we stretch far enough, if certain inhibitions are taken away. So definitely check out My Name is Human by Rob Shepherd. It was a fast and fun read, and it got me thinking, honestly. Even though, we've seen this type of story before, but Rob puts his own thing into it, and I can't recommend it. I can't recommend it much more, honestly. I think I've said it like 5 or 6 times in this video. Alright, let me take a sip of my coffee here, and then we're going to get into Lisey's story, which was, I had a very mixed reaction to. So, Lisey's story. Lisey's story is by Stephen King, and it was just recently turned into, or adapted into, Apple TV's new channel subscription service that they have. And that was one reason why I went and read the book. Lisey's story, my history with it is I bought it once it came out. I think I got it for Christmas, actually. And it's sat on my bookshelf since then. I did not read it. And over the years since I got the book, I noticed that Lisey's story, I think that's how you pronounce it, it doesn't get the attention that most other Stephen King books do. I never really thought of it until I started reading it. When I noticed that, I started reading it and I was like, you know what, this book isn't really talked about. At the beginning of this book, I absolutely adored it. And then I got confused. So let me go into the synopsis here. You can find at the back of the book. Lisey DeBuscher, Landon, I probably butchered some of that, lost her husband Scott 2 years ago after a 25-year marriage of the most profound and sometimes frightening intimacy. Scott was an award-winning, best-selling novelist and a very complicated man. Early in their relationship, before they married, Lisey had to learn from him about books and blood and bools. We'll get into bools. Later, she understood that there was a place Scott went, a place that both terrified and healed him, that could eat him alive or give him the ideas he needed in order to live. Now it's Lisey's turn to face Scott's demons. Lisey's turn to go to Booyah Moon. What begins as a widow's effort to sort through the papers of her celebrated husband becomes a nearly fatal journey into the darkness he inhabited. Perhaps King's most personal and powerful novel, Lisey's story is about the wellsprings of creativity, the temptations of madness, and the secret language of love. So, as I said, this story confused me because I didn't know exactly, and I think maybe a lot of readers who didn't connect with this book didn't know exactly what this book is supposed to be, because this book reads a lot like something a little more literary. In the comment section on one of my videos, I talked about, it's my top 10 Stephen King books. I had I'm currently reading Lisey's story. We'll see if it makes this list after the fact, because I planned on doing this review. And then I did a little screenshot of just a blank screen saying, spoiler alert, this book will not make my top 10 Stephen King list. And somebody commented and they were like, oh, I guess you didn't like Lisey's story. That's a shame because I liked it. And it's not that I didn't like this book. It's that it confused me, because I think one thing that's going on with this book that's wrong is it doesn't know what it wants to be. But on the same token, that could very well just be my expectation going into it, because it's a Stephen King book. You're expecting, monsters. And there's monsters in this book. But you're expecting there to be a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you're not going to get that. This is more of a literary work, honestly, with maybe just a bit more of a thicker plot that goes in the middle. And that's the fatal part that was discussed in the synopsis. It says there's a near fatal journey while Lisey goes through her husband's paperwork and some of his unpublished books 2 years after his death, and she's kind of forced into doing that for a certain situation. I'm not going to get into that because that's really the strongest part of the book plot-wise. The rest of it is really all character work. You go through Lisey's story, pun completely intended, but you go through Lisey's story of how she met her husband, their marriage, all the strange stuff that came with her husband, and then his death. It's confusing because, like I said, I don't think it knows what it wants to be, but I compared it in that comment section to a John Irving novel, because this book really does have some strong John Irving vibes in the writing. Not necessarily in the themes, maybe some, but mostly in the writing. It was weird reading a Stephen King book and thinking John Irving. But, it's more the structure of the novel itself. It really sits on the foundation of studying a character, and instead of delving deep into plot. And I think that's where the confusion is strongest, because when you read a Stephen King book, as I mentioned, you're expecting more plot than character study. Although Stephen King has been known for his more literary horror over the years. But this, I would say, is his literary extremist novel, if that makes any sense. So, as I said, there's not too much to the story here, but there is a story, obviously. This book is almost like an onion. It is story upon story upon story. It's one thing I loved about reading John Irving, is you don't just get one story, beginning, a middle, and an end. You get a story that has a story in it, that has another story in it, that has another story in it, that has another story in it. And I absolutely loved that about this book. Lisey's story completely blew me away for that reason. But I'm going to tell you something. There's something I did not like about this book. And it annoyed the living shit out of me. And that is all the colloquialism that's written throughout this story. It's a colloquial hell. It's okay. Lisey, her husband, the guy she married, I can't remember his name, Scott. He's a little insane, honestly, and to be quite fair, I can't help but think that this is Stephen King, honestly. Because when I picture Stephen King with his family, I can't help but think, after reading all the books I've read by him, I can't help but think that this is how they talk, this is how they communicate with one another. They have their own inside language, their own inside jokes, and they use it all the time. I mean, I see this with my own family. There's the inside jokes, there's the colloquials that keep repeating, and you know what, they annoy me in my own real life, and so I don't want to necessarily read them in this extremity, because it really does take over the language of the book. I would honestly recommend cutting that back just a bit, because oh my god, it just got overwhelming. I don't know how many times I was rolling my eyes every time they said a certain thing. That is, you know, the inside joke or the inside phrase that they've developed on their own, or adapted from Scott, or I should say adopted from Scott and his kind of, you know, crazy imagination and the crazy way upon which he lives. And this book, I enjoyed it overall. Let's get that out of the way. I enjoyed this book, but there was things about it that annoyed me. Mostly it was the language in which the characters spoke. Their inside language, I would call it, because there's no other way of explaining it, honestly. The colloquial language, it just got overbearing. And I would say, unless you're okay with that, and everything else I spoke of, where like there's very little in the way of a plot, although there is a plot that kind of threads itself throughout the novel, sort of like a little arc that goes beyond the rest of the story, and then we get back to where we were, and it just continues. There's a couple other things about this book I really liked. There is some interesting mental illness representation in this book, although it feels exaggerated in a Stephen King sort of way. And I don't know, because I've never known a person who cuts themselves in real life. But it seemed to me like it was well researched, either in the fact that Stephen King knows somebody who cuts themselves, or he did his research, and because it seemed rational, not, you know, the actual physical cutting of oneself, but he wasn't exploiting it. He was giving you facts as to why people do this within this one character. I mean, he doesn't ever like go into exposition, but when you think about this character who cut themselves, you realize, when you think about how and why they came to cutting themselves and the reasoning, it's Stephen King sort of showing you why people find themselves on that kind of a path. And so I'm sure there's people out there who would say it's not represented very well, but I found it seemed like to me like it was. So there's that interesting aspect to this book too. You know, I would recommend it because it's one of Stephen King's underhyped books. It is kind of brilliant in a sense, and at the same time, it just annoyed the living shit out of me. It still confuses me. It really confuses me. This book has me stumped. So I gave it 3.5 stars. That's not a bad review for me. I just think maybe if they cut back on some of the bad language, the colloquialisms that just keep popping up and keep popping up, that was really the absolute worst. But also, you know, it almost seemed like this book needed to find out what exactly it wanted to do. Did it want to be a thriller? Did it want to be a supernatural horror story? Or did it want to be a literary piece? Because all three of those crashing together like they do in this book, it works, and yet it felt like it needed to be polished just a bit more in order for them all to collide a little bit smoother, if that makes any sense. So that is my double review. I think I've rambled on way long enough. So thank you for listening, especially if you made it this far. So keep being safe, keep being creative, and I'll catch you guys in the next bookish video.